My daughter dropped my 3 grandkids off at my house 13 years ago, saying she just needed a nap. She never came back. I raised them. I fed them. I loved them when she treated them like garbage. But this morning she did not come back with a thank you card. She came back with a SWAT team, a lawyer in a $3,000 suit, and an accusation that I had kidnapped her children. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was just a senile old man they could crush. But they did not know about the envelope taped under the floorboards of my bedroom. When I finally slammed that yellowed paper onto the judge's bench, the look on his face was not anger. It was pure shock. He looked at me and whispered, "Do the children know about this?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Not yet, but they are about to. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It helps this old man know his story is being heard. It was 6 in the morning on a Sunday, and the only thing I was guilty of was using too much butter in the skillet. My name is Harrison Bennett. Everyone calls me Harry. I am 70 years old, and my knees crack like dry wood when it rains, but my hands are steady. I spent 40 years as a foreman on oil rigs out in West Texas, and that kind of work teaches you 2 things: patience and how to cook a breakfast that sticks to your ribs. The kitchen was quiet, except for the popping of bacon grease and the low hum of the refrigerator. This was my favorite time of day. In the other room, my 3 reasons for living were still asleep. Lucas is 17 now, a linebacker for the varsity team who eats like a horse. Emma is 15, sharp as a tack and already talking about law school. And Noah. Little Noah is 13. He was just a 2-month-old baby wrapped in a dirty towel when his mother left him here. I flipped the eggs over easy, just the way Noah likes them. I was mentally calculating my budget for the week. My pension check is $3,200 a month. After the mortgage, the utilities, and the grocery bill for 3 growing kids, I usually have about $50 left over. I had been saving that $50 in a coffee can for 6 months to buy Lucas a new baseball glove for the playoffs. It is not a glamorous life. We do not have vacations in Europe or fancy cars. But this house is warm and it is full of love. Or at least it was until the front door exploded. I did not even hear a knock. 1 second I was reaching for the salt shaker, and the next second there was a deafening boom that shook the framed photos off the hallway walls. Wood splinters flew across the living room like shrapnel. Before I could even turn off the stove, the kitchen was swarming with men in tactical gear. They were screaming commands that echoed off the linoleum. Police. Get on the ground. Hands where I can see them. I am an old man, but I am not slow. My first instinct was to run to the hallway to protect the bedrooms, to protect the kids. I took 1 step, and a heavy boot kicked my legs out from under me. I hit the floor hard. My face smashed into the cold tiles right next to a drop of bacon grease. Pain shot through my bad shoulder, but I ignored it. "Do not hurt them," I yelled, my voice raspy from the floor. "There are children in the house. Please do not hurt the children." A knee pressed into my back, pinning me down. I felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around my wrists. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could hear them waking up now. I heard Emma scream. I heard Noah crying. "Get off him." That was Lucas, my brave boy. I twisted my neck, trying to see. Lucas had run out of his room in his boxers and t-shirt, ready to fight an army to save his grandpa. "Stay back, Lucas," I shouted. "Do not move, son. Just stay back." 2 officers grabbed Lucas and shoved him against the wall. "He is just a boy," I pleaded. "He is 17. Please." That is when the sea of uniforms parted. The officers stepped aside, creating a path like they were making way for royalty. And in walked the devil herself. It had been 13 years, but I would know her walk anywhere. Rachel, my daughter. But this was not the Rachel I remembered. The last time I saw her, she weighed 90 pounds, soaking wet. Her skin was gray from meth and cheap liquor, and she had a bruise on her cheek from whatever dealer she was sleeping with that week. She had dumped 3 crying babies in my living room, said she was going to buy milk, and vanished. The woman standing in my kitchen now looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine. She was wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my truck. Her hair was blonde and perfectly styled. She had big dark sunglasses on, but she took them off slowly to reveal eyes that were perfectly made up with waterproof mascara. She looked healthy. She looked rich. And she looked at me with a disgust that chilled my blood. "There he is," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "There is the monster. Officer, that is the man who stole my babies." I lay there with my cheek pressed against the floor, unable to believe what I was hearing. Stole them. I did not steal them. I saved them. I scraped them off the bottom of the barrel where she left them. Rachel rushed past me, stepping over my legs like I was a piece of trash. She ran toward the hallway where the kids were huddled together, terrified. "Oh, my poor darlings," she wailed. Her voice was loud, theatrical. It sounded like a bad soap opera. "Mommy is here. Mommy finally found you. She has been looking for you for so long." I watched Noah shrink back. He did not know who this woman was. He was an infant when she left. To him, she was a stranger smelling of expensive perfume and chaos. But Rachel did not care. She grabbed Noah and Emma, pulling them into a suffocating hug. "Get away from them!" I roared, struggling against the handcuffs. The officer on my back pressed harder, forcing the air out of my lungs. "You have no right, Rachel," I spat out. "You abandoned them. You left them in dirty diapers for 2 days. You walked out." She turned to look at me, and for a split second the mask dropped. She gave me a smile that was pure ice, a smile that said, "I won." Then she turned back to the police officer standing next to her, with tears instantly flowing down her cheeks. "You see, officer," she sobbed, "he is delusional, he is violent, he has kept them prisoners here for 13 years. He told me if I ever came back, he would kill them. I have lived in fear every single day." Lies. It was all lies. But the police did not know that. They saw a well-dressed, distraught mother and a rough-looking old man on the floor of a messy kitchen. "Harrison Bennett," the officer said, pulling me up by my arms, "you are under arrest for 3 counts of kidnapping, custodial interference, and child endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." They dragged me out the front door. My neighbors were all outside on their lawns, in their bathrobes, watching. Mrs. Higgins, who I have shared garden vegetables with for 10 years, covered her mouth in horror. I wanted to shout to them. I wanted to tell them I was innocent, but the shame choked me. As they shoved me into the back of the patrol car, I looked back at the house. The front door was hanging off its hinges, and there on the porch was the final knife in my heart. Rachel had her arms around the kids. Lucas looked like he wanted to vomit. Emma was crying silently. Noah looked lost, and standing in front of them was a man with a camera, a photographer. Rachel was posing. She tilted her head just right to catch the morning light. She made sure her hair looked perfect. She squeezed the kids tighter, not to comfort them, but to make sure they were in the frame. "Hold it right there, Mrs. Bennett," the photographer said. "This is the cover of the year, the reunion of the century." Flashbulbs went off, blinding me through the police car window. My grandkids were being used as props in her sick play. I watched as the police car pulled away, leaving my entire world behind. I had spent 13 years protecting them from the wolves. I worked double shifts. I learned how to braid hair for Emma. I learned the rules of baseball for Lucas. I stayed up all night when Noah had fevers. I gave up my retirement, my savings, and my peace to fix what she broke. And now, in the span of 20 minutes, she had returned from the dead to burn it all down. But as I sat in that cage watching my neighborhood disappear, I stopped crying. A cold anger started to rise up in my chest. It was the same anger that kept me going on the oil rigs when the storms hit. Rachel thought she had won. She thought the expensive coat and the tears would fool everyone. She thought I was just a poor, helpless old man. She forgot one thing. She forgot who raised her. She forgot that I keep everything. And she definitely forgot about the yellow envelope I buried under the floorboards the night she sold her soul. The police officer looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You got anything to say, old-timer?" he asked. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. "Not yet," I whispered. "Not yet. But the war has just started, and I am going to burn her kingdom to the ground." The holding cell smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and hopelessness. It was a cold, industrial smell that settled deep in your lungs and stayed there. I sat on a steel bench that was bolted to the floor, my joints aching from the dampness. Around me were men who looked like they belonged in a place like this. Hard eyes, scarred knuckles, tattoos that told stories of bad decisions. And then there was me, Harrison Bennett, 70 years old, wearing orange slides that were 2 sizes too big and wondering if my grandkids had eaten breakfast. A guard rattled the bars with his baton. Bennett. Legal. They marched me down a hallway that echoed with shouts and curses to a small interview room. Sitting at a scratched metal table was a boy who looked like he hadn't started shaving yet. His suit was cheap polyester, and he was sweating through his shirt. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I am Arthur. I am your public defender." He didn't look me in the eye. He was shuffling papers nervously, dropping a pen, picking it up. "Look, Arthur," I said, my voice raspy. "I don't need a song and dance. Just tell me when I can go home to my kids." He grimaced. "That is the problem, sir. The judge denied bail initially, but we managed to get it set. $500,000. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Son, I have a pension check that covers the light bill and the groceries. I have $50 stashed in a coffee can for a baseball glove. You might as well have said $5 million. Arthur pulled a tablet out of his briefcase. "It is not just the bail, Mr. Bennett. It is the narrative. You need to see this." He tapped the screen and slid it across the table. I didn't want to look. I wanted to close my eyes and wake up in my kitchen flipping eggs. But I looked. It was a news conference. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Nightmare in Suburbia, Grandfather Kidnaps 3. Rachel was standing at a podium. The microphones were shoved in her face like hungry snakes. Next to her stood a man who looked like he was carved out of expensive marble. Sterling Holt. I knew him. Everyone knew him. He was the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances and ruined lives for a 30% cut. My father is a dangerous fanatic. Rachel was sobbing into the cameras. She looked fragile, broken. It was the best performance of her life. 13 years ago, I came home from work to surprise my babies. He was waiting on the porch. He had a shotgun. I felt my hands curl into fists under the table. A shotgun. The only gun I owned was a rusty BB gun I used to scare raccoons away from the trash cans. He told me if I didn't leave, he would kill me and the children. She continued wiping a tear from her perfect cheek. He forced me to run. He locked my babies in a dungeon. He kept them in the dark. He told them I was dead. For 13 years, I have been living in terror, hiding, praying for this day. A dungeon. My house sits on a concrete slab. There is no basement. The dark place she was talking about was a bedroom with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that I glued there myself, standing on a wobbly ladder, so Noah wouldn't be afraid of the night. The video cut to Sterling Holt. He stepped forward, his voice booming with righteous indignation. "We will not rest until this monster is put away for good. Harrison Bennett is a predator who stole a mother's love. We are suing for full custody and damages for the emotional torture inflicted on this brave woman." I pushed the tablet away so hard it nearly slid off the table. "Lies," I growled. It is all lies, Arthur. There was no gun. There was no dungeon. Arthur looked skeptical. He was young and he was watching a woman cry on HD video. Mr. Bennett, the court of public opinion is already convicting you. If you have any proof, any witnesses. I closed my eyes, and the memory of that day 13 years ago washed over me. It was so vivid I could smell the dust and the desperation. It wasn't a shotgun I was holding that day. It was a set of keys. Rachel had come to me shaking her skin gray from whatever pills she was popping. She owed money. A lot of money. To people who didn't send overdue notices. "They are going to kill me, Daddy," she had screamed, pulling at her hair. "They are going to hurt the kids. I didn't have $5,000 in the bank." So I walked out to the driveway. I looked at my 1978 Ford F-150, my truck. I had restored that engine with my own hands. It was the only thing I owned that was just mine. I drove it to the used car lot that afternoon. I sold it for cash. I walked back home 5 miles in the heat. I handed Rachel the stack of bills. "Take it," I had told her. "Pay them. Get clean. Be a mother." She snatched the money. She didn't say thank you. She didn't even look at the babies sleeping in the playpen. She just ran. And now here she was, telling the world I chased her off with a weapon. Mr. Bennett, Arthur said, his voice sounding far away. "We need to prepare a statement. Maybe plead diminished capacity. Given your age..." I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I am not senile, son, and I am not pleading to anything. I saved those kids. I sold my truck to save her life, and she sold me out for a headline." The guard opened the door. "Time's up." They moved me from the interview room to a general holding cell while they processed my paperwork. It was a larger cage filled with 20 or 30 men. A television was mounted high on the wall, protected by a plexiglass shield. The news was on. Of course it was. Breaking news flashed in red. The screen showed a helicopter shot of my house. Police tape was wrapped around the porch. My front door was smashed in. Then my mugshot appeared. I looked deranged. My hair was wild from the struggle. My eyes were wide with shock. One of the men on the bench shifted. He was a giant of a man with tattoos covering his neck and arms. He was watching the TV intently. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. Then he looked back at the screen. "Hey!" He grumbled, his voice deep and menacing. The chatter in the cell stopped. It went dead silent. The man stood up. He pointed a thick finger at the TV. "That is you, the kidnapper." I backed up until my shoulders hit the cold cinder block wall. I held up my hands, palms open. "It is not what they are saying," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is a lie." The man didn't listen. "In here there is a hierarchy, and people who hurt kids are at the bottom, below the rats, below the dirt. You locked them in a dungeon, old man," he spat. "You stole them from their mama." He took a step toward me, then another. The other prisoners formed a circle, blocking the view of the guards. I saw the rage in his eyes. It was the same rage I felt when I looked at Rachel, but his was directed at me. I braced myself. I was 70 years old. I had bad knees and a bad shoulder. I wasn't going to win this fight. He pulled his arm back. I saw the fist coming like a freight train. For the kids, I thought. I have to survive for the kids. His fist connected with my jaw. A blinding white light exploded in my skull. The taste of copper filled my mouth. My head snapped back and hit the concrete wall with a sound like a cracking branch. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall, the sounds of the jail fading into a high-pitched ring. As the darkness swallowed me up, the last thing I saw was the news ticker on the TV screen above. Mother reunited with children, a miracle in Texas. Then everything went black. I woke up in the infirmary with a headache that felt like a drill bit grinding into the base of my skull. My jaw was swollen tight, and every time I swallowed, I tasted copper and old pennies. The doctor gave me 2 Tylenol and a piece of paper that said I was fit for release. My public defender, Arthur, was waiting for me by the discharge gate. He looked even more nervous than he had the day before. He told me he had managed to secure a bail bond, but the collateral was steep. It was everything I had. My house. The deed to the land my father bought 50 years ago. If I missed a court date or violated a condition of my release, the bondsman would take the roof over my head. I signed the papers with a shaking hand. I did not care about the house. A house is just wood and brick. Without those kids, it was just a box of air anyway. The taxi ride home was a slow humiliation. I kept my head down, but I could feel the driver watching me in the rearview mirror. He knew who I was. My face was on every news channel in the state. The kidnapper grandpa. The monster who stole children. When he dropped me off at the curb, he didn't even take my money. He just spat out the window onto my driveway and peeled away. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the wreckage of my life. The police tape was fluttering in the wind like some twisted party streamer. The front door, the heavy oak door I had refinished 3 times over the years, was splintered down the middle. The lock mechanism was hanging by a single screw. I stepped over the yellow tape and pushed the broken door open. It groaned on its hinges. The silence hit me first. For 13 years, this house had been a symphony of noise. Cartoons blaring on Saturday mornings, sneakers squeaking on the hardwood, the sound of Emma practicing her violin, which sounded like a dying cat for the first 2 years, but eventually became beautiful. The sound of Noah laughing at his own jokes. Now there was nothing, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own ragged breathing. The police had tossed the place. Sofa cushions were slashed open. Drawers were pulled out and dumped on the floor. Cereal boxes were overturned in the kitchen, spilling Cheerios across the tiles like dry rain. But as I walked down the hallway, I realized the police were not the ones who had done the real damage. The walls of the hallway used to be covered in photos, school portraits, pictures of Lucas catching his first fish, Emma in her ballet recital costume, Noah with chocolate cake smeared all over his face on his first birthday. The frames were still there, hanging crookedly on the nails. But they were empty. The glass was smashed on the floor, and the photos were gone. Rachel had taken them. Or worse, she had destroyed them. She wanted to erase the last 13 years. She wanted to pretend that I had never been their father. I walked into the boys' room. It was a wreck. Mattresses overturned, clothes scattered. I sat down on the edge of Noah's bed frame. My boot hit something hard and plastic. I reached down under the bed and pulled it out. It was a pacifier, old and yellowed with a little cartoon bear on the front. Noah had hidden it there years ago when we told him he was too big for it. I held that small piece of plastic in my calloused hand, and suddenly I wasn't in a silent, broken house anymore. I was back in the driveway 13 years ago on a humid Tuesday night. The air smelled of impending rain and cheap vodka. Rachel was standing by the open door of a rusted Camaro. The engine was idling, and the muffler was coughing out black smoke. A man I didn't know was in the driver's seat, tapping on the steering wheel impatiently. He had tattoos on his neck, and eyes that looked like dead shark eyes. Rachel looked thin. Her collarbones poked out of her skin like wire hangers. She was holding a lit cigarette in one hand and a diaper bag in the other. I had begged her. I stood in the driveway in my work boots and pleaded with her. "Rachel, you cannot go," I had said. "You have a baby who needs milk. You have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. They need their mother." She took a drag of the cigarette and blew the smoke in my face. It smelled chemical and sour. "I am done, Daddy," she said. Her voice wasn't sad. It was annoyed. "I am done with the crying. I am done with the diapers. I am done with this town. I want to live. I want to be free." She reached into the car window and pulled out a key ring. She threw it at Mamie. It hit me in the chest and fell into the dirt. There, she said. Those are the keys to the house. You want them so bad you keep them. They are just little monkeys anyway. Just baggage. Little monkeys. Baggage. That is what she called her own flesh and blood. I picked up the keys from the dirt. When I looked up, she was already getting into the car. Rachel, I yelled, if you leave now, do not come back. Do not come back unless you are clean. She laughed. It was a high, wild sound. Don't worry, old man. You won't see me again. I am going to Vegas. The Camaro screeched out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on the pavement. I stood there watching her tail lights disappear around the corner. Then I heard a cry from inside the house. It was Noah. He was hungry. I went inside, I picked him up, and I made a promise to a baby who couldn't even focus his eyes yet. I promised him he would never be baggage. I promised him he would be the center of the world. The memory faded, and I was back in the silent room holding the old pacifier. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. She claimed I chased her off with a shotgun. The truth was she threw them away like old trash because they interfered with her freedom. And now that they came with a trust fund, she suddenly remembered she was a mother. A heavy knock on the door frame pulled me out of my thoughts. I put the pacifier in my pocket. Standing in the doorway was a sheriff's deputy. I knew him. It was Miller. We fished in the same creek sometimes. He couldn't look me in the eye. He held out a stack of papers. I am sorry, Harry, he mumbled. I really am. But I have to serve you. I took the papers. It was a temporary restraining order. I was ordered to stay 500 yards away from Lucas, Emma, and Noah Bennett. I was ordered to have no contact, direct or indirect. I was ordered to surrender any firearms. She has them at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, Miller said quietly. She has private security. Don't go near there, Harry. If you violate this, they will revoke your bail and you will rot in a cell until trial. I nodded. I understood. The law was a hammer, and right now Rachel was holding the handle. Miller left, leaving me alone in the tomb of my house. I walked to the kitchen. I needed to eat something. My stomach was cramping from hunger, but the thought of food made me nauseous. I opened the fridge. There was the carton of eggs from yesterday morning, still sitting on the counter where I left them. The milk had gone warm. I poured the milk down the sink. I started cleaning. It was the only thing I could think to do. I swept up the Cheerios. I threw away the broken glass from the picture frames. I scrubbed the boot prints off the floor. I tried to put my world back in order, but the silence was heavy. It pressed against my ears. It was 9 o'clock at night when it happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at the wall, wondering if Emma had her inhaler. She gets asthma when she panics. Rachel wouldn't know that. Rachel wouldn't know where we kept the medicine. The landline phone on the wall rang. It startled me so bad I nearly knocked over my chair. Nobody calls the landline anymore except telemarketers. We only kept it because the cell service is spotty in storms. It rang again, loud and shrill. I walked over to it. My hand hovered over the receiver. If this was a reporter, I was going to rip the cord out of the wall. I picked it up. Hello. There was a static hiss, then a heavy breathing. Grandpa. The voice was a whisper, terrified and shaking. My heart stopped. It was Lucas. Lucas, I said, gripping the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Son, are you okay? Where are you? I am in the bathroom, Lucas whispered. I stole a maid's phone. Grandpa, you have to help us. She is crazy. She is absolutely crazy. Slow down, son, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my knees were shaking. What is happening? She locked us in a suite, Lucas said. She took our phones. She took Emma's inhaler because she said it looked ugly in the photos. Grandpa, she hired a styling team. She is making us wear these scratchy clothes and posing us for Instagram. She keeps pinching Noah when he doesn't smile. I felt a red-hot rage flood my vision. She took the inhaler. She was hurting them. Lucas, listen to me, I said. You have to be strong. You have to protect your brother and sister. I can't, Lucas sobbed. There are big men outside the door. Security guards. They won't let us leave. She told us you were going to prison forever. She said we belong to her now. She keeps talking about money, Grandpa. She's on the phone with lawyers talking about a trust fund. She doesn't want us. She wants the check. I knew it. In my gut, I knew it wasn't love. It was greed. Lucas, I need you to listen, I said firmly. I am not going to prison. I am going to get you back. I promise. But I need you to do exactly what I say. Keep your heads down. Do not fight the guards. But keep your eyes open. Remember everything she says. Can you do that? I think so, Lucas sniffled. But Grandpa, hurry. She is talking about taking us away. She said something about Switzerland, about a boarding school. Switzerland. She was going to ship them off like parcels. Grandpa, I have to go, Lucas whispered urgently. She is coming. There was a sound of a door handle rattling, then a sharp female voice in the background screaming, "Who are you talking to?" The line went dead. I stood there in the dark kitchen holding the phone that was now just a piece of plastic. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a warning. 500 yards. The law said I had to stay away. The law said she was their mother. But the law didn't hear the fear in my boy's voice. The law didn't know about the inhaler. I hung up the phone. I walked to the bedroom. I pulled my old duffel bag out from the closet. I wasn't going to sit here and wait for a court date while she tortured them. I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. He was a man I hadn't spoken to in 20 years. A man who owed me a favor from a time when we were both young and stupid in the oil fields. A man who used to be a private investigator before the whiskey took over. Dutch. If anyone could find out where the money was coming from, it was him. And if anyone could help me break a few rules without getting caught, it was Dutch. I grabbed my keys. The silence in the house wasn't oppressive anymore. It was a countdown. Not yet, Rachel, I whispered to the empty room. You haven't won yet. The silence in the kitchen after the line went dead was heavy enough to crush a man. My hand was still gripping the receiver, white-knuckled and shaking. Lucas had managed to whisper the rest of the horror story before the connection cut. It was worse than I thought. Rachel had turned that hotel suite into a prison and a stage. She had forced Emma into a dress that was too tight and too short, pushing her in front of a ring light to film a video for her new followers. She made them smile. She made them say they missed their mommy. And when the camera stopped rolling, she locked them in the bedroom and went to the hotel bar. But the part that made my blood turn to ice was Noah. My 13-year-old boy has an allergy to peanuts so severe that even the dust from a shell can close his throat in 2 minutes flat. We keep EpiPens in the kitchen in his backpack and in the glove box of the truck. Rachel did not know that. How could she? She left before he was eating solid food. Lucas told me she had ordered room service. She threw a plate of peanut butter cookies on the bed and told Noah to eat them for the camera because it would look cute. When Noah refused, terrified, she grabbed his face. She tried to force it into his mouth. Lucas had to physically shove his own mother away to save his brother's life. She screamed at them. She called them ungrateful brats. She confiscated the EpiPen Lucas had in his pocket, saying he was being dramatic. My grandson was sitting in a hotel room with a woman who almost killed him out of ignorance and vanity, and he had no medicine. I could not sit there. I grabbed my keys and drove to the precinct. I drove fast. The speedometer climbed past the limit, but I did not care. I spent 40 years on oil rigs in the Permian Basin. I started as a roughneck and ended as a foreman. In that world, when a pipe bursts or a pressure valve fails, you do not file a complaint. You fix it. You use your hands, your back, and your will to stop the disaster before it kills your crew. You solve problems with action. But as I walked into the police station under the buzzing fluorescent lights, I realized my world of action meant nothing here. I marched up to the front desk. The sergeant on duty was a man named Kowalski. I had fixed his lawnmower once for free. He looked up from his computer, saw my face, and his expression hardened like concrete. "I need to file a report," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My grandchildren are in immediate danger." Kowalski leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Is that right, Mr. Bennett? Danger from who?" "Their mother." "Yes, their mother," I snapped. "She tried to feed a child with a deadly nut allergy peanut butter cookies. She took away his medical device. That is endangerment. You need to send a welfare check to the Ritz-Carlton right now." Kowalski let out a short, dry laugh. It was a cruel sound. "Let me get this straight. The man who is currently out on bail for kidnapping 3 children wants to report the victim for giving her son a cookie. Do you know how crazy that sounds?" "It is not crazy," I slammed my hand on the counter. "It is the truth. She does not know them. She is hurting them." Kowalski stood up. He was a big man, but I had faced down men twice his size when a rig was blowing out. I did not flinch. "Look, old man," Kowalski said, his voice dropping to a menace. "You are lucky you are not in a cell right now. You are the suspect. She is the mother. She has custody. If she wants to feed her kid a cookie, she can feed him a cookie. You do not get to dictate how she parents the children you stole." Stole. That word again. Like I was a thief in the night, instead of the only person who cared if they lived or died. "She almost killed him," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Go home," Bennett Kowalski said, pointing to the door. "Before I revoke your bail for harassment. Get out of here." I walked out of the station feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. On the rig, I commanded respect. When I gave an order, men moved because they knew I kept them safe. Here I was, just a crazy old criminal. The law was a wall, and I was smashing my head against it. I walked to my truck, parked in the dark corner of the lot. The night air was thick and humid. I felt powerless. It was a feeling I hated more than pain. I reached for the door handle, but a voice stopped me. "Mr. Bennett." I turned around. A silver Mercedes was parked 2 spots over, idling quietly. Leaning against the hood was Sterling Holt. In person, he looked even more like a shark than he did on TV. His suit was tailored to perfection, dark blue and sharp. His shoes shone under the streetlights. He was smoking a thin cigarette, holding it like a dart. I stiffened. My hands balled into fists at my sides. "What do you want?" Holt took a long drag and exhaled the smoke toward the sky. He pushed off the car and walked toward me. He didn't look scared. He looked bored. "I am here to offer you a parachute, Harry. Can I call you Harry?" "You can call me Mr. Bennett," I said. "And I don't want anything you have to offer." Holt chuckled. He reached into his jacket pocket. I tensed, ready to swing if he pulled a weapon. But he pulled out a white envelope. He held it out to me. "Inside this envelope is a cashier's check for $50,000. I looked at the envelope, then at his face. $50,000. That was more money than I had saved in 10 years. It could pay off the mortgage. It could fix the truck. "What is this for?" I asked. "It is a severance package," Holt said smoothly. "Rachel is feeling generous. She knows you took care of them for a long time. She wants to thank you. All you have to do is sign a document." I stared at him. "What document?" "Just a standard voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. Holt said, waving his hand dismissively. You admit that you were overwhelmed, that you are getting too old to care for 3 teenagers. You agree to drop any contest for custody. You take the money, you move to a nice retirement community in Florida, and you never contact Rachel or the children again. The rage started in my stomach and burned its way up my throat. It was hot and blinding. You want me to sell them, I said, my voice low. Holt shrugged. I want you to be realistic, Harry. Look at you. You are 70. You are broke. You are facing felony kidnapping charges. I will destroy you in court. I will paint you as a senile, abusive hoarder who stole those kids. You will die in prison. Or you can take the 50 grand and go fishing. It is a win-win. I looked at the envelope. $50,000. It was the price of my honor. It was the price of Noah's life. I reached out and took the envelope. Holt smiled a greasy, triumphant smile. Smart man, he said. I knew you were reasonable. I held the envelope up to my face. I could smell the expensive paper. Then very slowly I tore it in half. Holt's smile vanished. I tore it again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti. I threw the pieces at his shiny shoes. You tell my daughter, I said, stepping into his personal space, that I am not for sale. And you tell her that if one hair on Noah's head is harmed because of her stupidity, I will not need a lawyer. I will come for her myself. Holt stared at the shredded paper on the asphalt. His face twisted into a sneer. You are making a mistake, old man, he hissed. A big one. I gave you a chance. Now I am going to bury you. He got back into his Mercedes and peeled out of the lot, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. I watched his taillights fade. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. They thought they could buy me. They thought I was just some poor old fool who would trade his family for a paycheck. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I got into my truck and slammed the door. I didn't have money. I didn't have the law on my side. But I had something they didn't. I had the truth. And I had a friend named Dutch who could find a needle in a haystack if the needle was made of gold. I started the engine. The old Ford rumbled to life. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going to find out why Rachel suddenly had the money to hire a lawyer like Sterling Holt, and why she needed my grandkids so desperately that she would try to bribe me into silence. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. I drove through the night with the image of that shredded check burning in my mind. $50,000. That was what Sterling Holt thought my grandchildren were worth. That was the price tag Rachel had put on 13 years of my life. It made me sick. But more than that, it made me suspicious. Rachel had left town with a guy named Travis, who stole copper wire from construction sites to buy meth. She didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Now she was back with a high-priced lawyer, a wardrobe full of designer clothes, and a private security team. Where did the money come from? It wasn't from Travis. Guys like that don't leave inheritances. They leave debts and criminal records. I pulled my truck up to a rusted Airstream trailer parked in the back lot of a storage facility on the edge of town. A single yellow bulb buzzed over the door, attracting moths the size of my hand. This was the office and home of Dutch. We served together in the Gulf. He was the best reconnaissance man I ever saw until the bottle got its hooks in him. Now he worked as a private investigator for people who couldn't go to the police. He found lost dogs cheating husbands and the occasional skipped bail bond. I banged on the aluminum door. It rattled like a tin can. Dutch, open up. It's Harry. There was a crash from inside, then a string of curses. The door swung open. Dutch stood there wearing nothing but boxer shorts and a stained tank top. He held a revolver loosely in one hand and a bottle of bourbon in the other. His beard was gray and wild, and his eyes were bloodshot maps of bad decisions. Harry, he grunted, squinting into the dark. You look like you got hit by a truck. I feel like it, Dutch. Can I come in? He stepped aside and I walked into the smell of old paper gun oil and rot-gut whiskey. The trailer was a mess of files, computer parts, and empty bottles, but on one side there was a desk with 3 monitors humming with blue light. That was Dutch's altar. I sat on a plastic crate and told him everything. The raid, the arrest, the cookies, the bribe from Holt. Dutch listened without blinking, taking pulls from his bottle. When I finished, he set the gun down on the desk with a heavy clunk. "So she is back," he said, his voice gravelly, "and she is flush with cash. She is loaded, Dutch. Sterling Holt doesn't get out of bed for less than 10 grand a retainer. She has bodyguards. She has a suite at the Ritz." "Where is it coming from?" Dutch cracked his knuckles. "Let us find out." He sat at the computer, and his fingers flew across the keyboard. For a drunk, he typed faster than anyone I knew. "First things first," Dutch muttered. "Let us track the boyfriend, Travis Miller." I watched the screen as lines of code and databases flashed by. It took Dutch 5 minutes. "Well, here is your first dead end," Dutch said, pointing at the screen. "Travis Miller is dead. Died 2 months ago in a motel in Oklahoma. Fentanyl overdose. He had $40 in his pocket and a warrant for his arrest. So it wasn't him," I said. "He didn't win the lottery." "No," Dutch said, rubbing his beard. "But look at this." Rachel was listed as the next of kin on the coroner's report. She identified the body, but she didn't claim his ashes. She let the state bury him. "That sounds like her," I said bitterly. Dutch leaned back. "Okay, so the money didn't come from the boyfriend. Did she get a job? Did she rob a bank?" He pulled up her financial records, or at least the ones he could access through his back doors. "Nothing," he said. "No employment history for 10 years. No credit cards in her name until 3 weeks ago." Then suddenly, boom. Platinum cards. Bank accounts opened in the Cayman Islands. A shell company called RB Holdings. "Where did the seed money come from?" I asked, leaning in. Dutch squinted. "Wire transfer. A big one. It came from a law firm in Dallas. McIntyre and Sloan." "Who are they?" Dutch typed the name. "They are estate lawyers, Harry. Big time. They handle wills and trusts for the oil money crowd." My heart started to beat faster. Rachel didn't know anyone with oil money. She hung out with junkies and losers. Unless I whispered. "Unless it is about the father." Dutch spun his chair around. "The kid's father. You told me he was some homeless guy she met at a concert. That is what she told you, right? That is what she said." I nodded. "She said his name was Jack, and he played guitar on the street corner. She said he died of pneumonia before Noah was born." Dutch cracked a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Harry, rule number 1. Everybody lies, especially junkies covering their tracks." He turned back to the screen. "Let us look at the birth certificates again." He pulled up the records. Father listed as unknown for all 3. But then he dug deeper into the court archives. He found a sealed file from 13 years ago, a paternity test ordered by the state when Rachel applied for welfare right before she left. "Here we go," Dutch whispered. "The state demanded a name so they could chase child support. She gave them a name. Jackson Cole." I had never heard the name. Jackson Cole. Who is he? Dutch was already searching. He went quiet for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the computer fans and the moths hitting the window. Then he let out a low whistle. "Harry, you might want to sit down for this." "I am sitting, Dutch." Jackson Cole wasn't homeless. Dutch said, his voice low and serious. He was the black sheep. He was the secret son of Jebediah Stone. The name hit me like a physical blow. Jebediah Stone. The Stone Oil Corporation. One of the richest men in Texas. He owned half the Permian Basin. He died last month. It was all over the news. Jackson Cole was his illegitimate son, Dutch explained, reading from a legal briefing he had hacked into. Stone paid him off to stay away. Jackson lived a quiet life. He died in a motorcycle accident 4 months ago. He didn't have a will. And since he didn't have a will, I said, my mind racing, the money goes to his next of kin. Dutch nodded. And since Jackson Cole didn't have a wife or parents, it goes to his children, I finished. Dutch hit a key and a document popped up on the screen. It was a probate filing from the Dallas court. Jebediah Stone left a trust for his son Jackson. Since Jackson is dead, the trust passes to Jackson's issue. That means Lucas, Emma, and Noah. I stared at the screen. The numbers were blurring. How much, Dutch? Dutch scrolled to the bottom of the page. He pointed to a figure that had more zeros than I had ever seen in my life. $18.5 million, he said. The room spun. 18.5 million. My grandkids who wore hand-me-down clothes and ate generic cereal were multi-millionaires. And here is the kicker, Dutch said, tapping the screen hard. The money is in a trust until they turn 21, but the legal guardian gets a management fee. $500,000 a year, plus a housing allowance and full access to the estate for the benefit of the children. I felt the bile rise in my throat. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about redemption. It wasn't even about the $50,000 bribe Sterling Holt had offered me. That was pocket change. She needs them, I said, my voice trembling with rage. She needs physical custody to unlock the bank. Dutch handed me a printout of the file. She doesn't just need custody, Harry. She needs to be the sole guardian. That is why she charged you with kidnapping. If you are a felon, you can't challenge her guardianship. She takes the kids, she gets the check, and she lives like a queen in the Stone family mansion while raising them on nannies and boarding schools. I looked at the paper in my hand. It was a death sentence for my family disguised as a legal document. Rachel didn't see Lucas, Emma, and Noah as people. She saw them as winning lottery tickets she had almost thrown away. 13 years, I whispered. She didn't call. She didn't send a birthday card. But the minute the check cleared, she kicked down my door. Dutch poured himself another drink. His hand was shaking, but his eyes were clear. So what do we do, Harry? She has the lawyers. She has the money. She has the law. I stood up. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket next to Noah's old pacifier. We have the truth, Dutch, and we have something she doesn't. What is that? We know who she really is, and I know where she keeps her skeletons. I walked to the door of the trailer. The night air felt cooler now, but my blood was boiling hot. She wants a war over those kids, I said, looking back at my old friend. She thinks she is fighting a poor old man. She forgot that I am the one who taught her how to survive. And now I am going to teach her what happens when you cross a father. Dutch grabbed his keys and a leather jacket. Where are we going? To the airport, I said. If she gets those kids on a plane and leaves the state jurisdiction, we will never see them again. She is going to try to run Dutch, just like she did 13 years ago, but this time I am not going to stand in the driveway and watch her leave. This time I am going to stop her, even if I have to tear the plane apart with my bare hands. I sat on the worn bench seat of Dutch's trailer, staring at the stack of papers until the numbers started to blur into a single terrifying picture. It was not just a will, it was a business plan. And my grandchildren were the inventory. Dutch tapped a paragraph on the 3rd page with a grease-stained fingernail. Read that part, Harry. That is the engine that drives this whole machine. I put on my reading glasses. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was clear enough to make my stomach turn. The trust fund established by Jackson Cole was valued at $18.5 million. It was locked down tight. The principal could not be touched until the beneficiaries reached the age of 21. But there was a clause, a stipulation for the legal guardian. The guardian of the beneficiaries shall receive an annual stipend for the management of the domestic estate. That stipend was set at $500,000 a year. $500,000, just for keeping them alive. And there was more. The guardian was granted right of residency in the Cole family estate in Highland Park until the youngest child reached the age of majority. I looked up at Dutch. My hands were shaking. She gets a mansion and a $500,000 salary. I said, my voice quiet with fury. That is why she came back. She did not come back for hugs and kisses. She came back for a paycheck. Dutch nodded, pouring another shot of bourbon into a chipped mug. It gets worse, Harry. Look at the timeline. Jackson Cole died 4 months ago. The probate hearing to appoint the permanent guardian and release the funds is scheduled for next Tuesday. Next Tuesday. That was 6 days away. I did the math in my head. For 13 years, I had de facto custody. In the eyes of the family court, I was the psychological parent. If Rachel had just walked in and asked for them, a judge would have looked at her abandonment and my 13 years of care and likely given me guardianship, or at least shared custody. And that would mean I would control the trust. I would protect the money for the kids. Rachel would get nothing. But a kidnapper does not get custody. A felon does not get to manage an $18 million trust. She had to nuke me, I realized. She had to destroy my character completely. That is why she brought the SWAT team. That is why she made up the story about the shotgun and the dungeon. She needed me to be a monster so she could be the savior. If I am in jail next Tuesday, she walks into that probate hearing unchallenged. She gets the gavel to bang in her favor, and the keys to the vault are hers. They are just tickets to her, I whispered. Lucas, Emma, Noah, they are just winning lottery tickets. I thought about Noah's peanut allergy. I thought about Emma's asthma. Rachel did not care about those things because they did not affect the payout. If anything happened to them, the money would probably just roll over to her anyway. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I need to warn them, I said, standing up. I need to tell Lucas. He needs to know she is lying. I pulled out the burner phone I had bought at the gas station. I dialed the number of the maid's phone Lucas had stolen. I prayed he had kept it hidden. I prayed he was safe in that bathroom. The line rang once. Then it clicked. I held my breath. Lucas. We are sorry, came a robotic female voice. The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service. My heart sank like a stone. She found it. She must have found the phone. I dialed again, hoping I had misdialed. Same message. Disconnected. She had cut the line. My boy was alone in that hotel room, surrounded by security guards and a mother who saw him as a walking dollar sign, and I couldn't even tell him I was coming. Dutch stood up and walked over to the small television set perched on a stack of milk crates. He turned the volume up. Harry, look at this. I turned. It was the local news channel again. The banner at the bottom screamed breaking news. There was Rachel again. She was standing outside the Ritz-Carlton. She had changed her outfit. Now she was wearing a modest black dress and pearls, looking like a grieving saint. Sterling Holt was hovering over her shoulder like a vulture in a silk suit. The reporter thrust a microphone forward. Mrs. Bennett, what are your plans now that you have been reunited with your children? Rachel looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were shimmering with fake tears. We need to heal, she said, her voice trembling just the right amount. My babies have been through so much trauma. Being held captive by that man for 13 years has left deep scars. We need peace. We need privacy. She paused and took a deep breath. That is why I have decided to take them away from this place, she continued. We are leaving for Europe tonight. There is a specialized trauma center in Switzerland that deals with abduction survivors. I am taking them there to recover. We need to be as far away from Harrison Bennett as possible. The reporter nodded sympathetically. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Mrs. Bennett. When do you leave? Our flight leaves in 2 hours, Rachel said. We are heading to the private airfield now. We just want to move on. I stared at the screen. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Europe. Switzerland. It wasn't a therapy trip. It was an extraction. If she got them on a plane to Switzerland, they would be out of the jurisdiction of the Texas courts. International custody battles take years, decades. Once those wheels left the tarmac, I would never see them again. She would stash them in some boarding school, collect her $500,000 a year, and live the high life in Paris or Rome while my grandkids wondered why I stopped fighting for them. She is running, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She knows the probate hearing is next week, but she is scared. She is scared I might make bail. She is scared the truth about the kidnapping charge might come out before Tuesday. So she is taking the assets and fleeing. Dutch grabbed his leather jacket off the hook. 2 hours, Harry. That private airfield is 40 minutes away with traffic. I looked at my old friend. He was drunk, but he was steady. He knew what this meant. This wasn't a legal battle anymore. This was a rescue mission. If we go there, I said, we are breaking the restraining order. We are breaking bail. If the cops catch me, I could go to prison for 20 years. Dutch checked the load in his revolver and tucked it into his waistband. He tossed me the keys to his beat-up Chevelle. Then we better not get caught, he said. I caught the keys. I thought about Lucas's terrified voice on the phone. I thought about Noah's EpiPen. I thought about Emma's future, being sold for a sports car and a mansion. Let's go, I said. I walked out of the trailer into the humid Texas night. The stars were bright overhead, but I didn't look up. I was looking at the road. I was looking at the clock ticking down in my head. Rachel thought she had won. She thought the money and the lawyers and the lies had built a fortress around her. She thought she could just fly away with my heart in her luggage. She was wrong. She forgot that I built oil rigs in hurricanes. She forgot that I raised 3 kids on minimum wage and determination. I am coming for them, Rachel, I thought, as the engine roared to life. And I am bringing hell with me. Dutch drove that Chevelle like he was running from the devil himself. The engine roared and the chassis rattled as we hit 80, then 90 on the farm roads leading to the private airfield. The wind whipped through the open windows, carrying the smell of ozone and burning rubber. I gripped the dashboard with one hand, and the tire iron I had pulled from under the seat with the other. My knuckles were white. We have 10 minutes, Harry Dutch shouted over the engine noise. If that pilot has clearance, they will be wheels up before we clear the gate. Drive faster, I said. Just drive faster. We rounded the final bend, and the airfield came into view. It wasn't like the commercial airport with its miles of terminals. This was a playground for the elite. A small, sleek building made of glass and steel surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Beyond the fence, the runway lights were already glowing amber in the darkness. And there it was. A white Gulfstream jet sat on the tarmac, its engines whining a high-pitched scream that vibrated in my chest. A black SUV was parked right next to the stairs. I saw them. The floodlights from the hangar cut through the night and illuminated the scene like a stage play from hell. Rachel was there. She was dragging Noah by his arm. My 13-year-old grandson was digging his heels into the asphalt trying to pull away, but she didn't care. She yanked him so hard his head snapped back. A large man in a suit was carrying Emma over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes while she kicked and screamed. And then I saw Lucas, my boy. He wasn't crying. He was fighting. He had squared up against another bodyguard, swinging his fists with everything he had. The guard just laughed and shoved him backward. Lucas fell hard, but he scrambled right back up, placing himself between the plane and his brother. "They are forcing them, Dutch," I yelled. "Ram the gate." Dutch didn't hesitate. He didn't touch the brakes. He floored it. The heavy Chevelle hit the chain-link gate doing 60 miles an hour. Metal screamed and sparks flew as the gate buckled and tore away from its hinges. We careened onto the tarmac tires screeching as Dutch wrestled the steering wheel to keep us from flipping. We roared across the open pavement, heading straight for the jet. The pilot must have seen us because the engines flared louder, trying to power up. "Block the runway," I shouted. "Do not let them take off." Dutch spun the wheel hard. The car drifted sideways, rubber burning, and we slammed to a halt directly in front of the nose of the plane. We were less than 50 feet from the stairs. I kicked the passenger door open before the car had even settled. I jumped out, my bad knees protesting the impact, but the adrenaline washed away the pain. I gripped the tire iron in my right hand. It was heavy. It was cold. It was the only weapon I had. "Let them go!" I roared, my voice cracking over the whine of the jet engines. The tableau on the tarmac froze. The bodyguard holding Emma dropped her to her feet. Lucas looked over at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and hope. "Grandpa," he screamed. Rachel turned slowly. The wind from the turbines whipped her hair across her face. She didn't look scared. She looked furious. She looked at me like I was a cockroach that refused to die. "Get them on the plane," she shrieked at the guards. "Now! Move!" The guards hesitated, looking at the crazy old man with a metal pipe and the wild-eyed driver with a revolver in his waistband. I marched forward. I was 70 years old. I had arthritis and a heart that skipped beats. But in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. "You touch them again, and I will break every bone in your body," I growled, swinging the tire iron. One of the guards, the biggest one, stepped toward me. He reached inside his jacket. Dutch fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the pistol was sharp and loud. "Back off," Dutch yelled. "Back off, or the next one is not a warning." The guard stopped, his hands held up. Rachel looked at the guard, then at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She grabbed Noah by the back of his shirt and tried to haul him up the stairs herself. "No," I shouted, and I ran. I covered the distance between us in seconds. I wasn't thinking about the law. I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I was only thinking about stopping her. I reached the bottom of the stairs just as she dragged Noah up the first step. I grabbed the railing and swung the tire iron against the metal stairs. Clang. The sound rang out like a church bell. "Let him go, Rachel." She looked down at me. "You are pathetic," she hissed. "You are a broke, pathetic old man. You think you can stop this. I own them. You gave birth to them," I said. "You do not own them." Sirens. I heard them in the distance first, then getting louder fast. Blue and red lights began to strobe against the white fuselage of the plane. The airport police, the county sheriff, maybe the feds. They were all coming. Rachel smiled. A cruel, victorious smile. "You are done, Harry," she said. "You just handed me everything." She was right. I had broken bail. I had broken the restraining order. I had driven through a security gate and brandished a weapon on an airfield. But I didn't care. As long as that plane didn't take off, I had won. "Freeze. Drop the weapon." The voice came from behind me, amplified by a megaphone. I turned around. 3 police cruisers had screeched to a halt behind Dutch's car. Officers were behind their doors, guns drawn and aimed at my chest. Mr. Bennett dropped the bar. "Now." I looked at Lucas. He was crying now, standing on the tarmac. I looked at Emma huddled next to him. I looked at Noah still in his mother's grip on the stairs. "I love you," I shouted to them. "I love you more than anything. Do not forget that." I started to lower the tire iron. I was going to surrender. I was going to get on my knees, but the guard, the one Dutch had warned, saw his opening. He lunged at me. I reacted on instinct. I swung the bar up to defend myself. "Taser, taser, taser," a voice screamed. I heard a pop. Then 2 sharp prongs hit me in the chest. It felt like getting hit by lightning. My entire body seized up. Every muscle contracted at once. The pain was blinding white and hot. My legs went rigid and I fell backward, hitting the hard asphalt with a sickening thud. The tire iron clattered away from my hand. I lay there twitching, unable to breathe, unable to move. I could hear Lucas screaming my name. Grandpa. No, Grandpa. Boots surrounded me. Heavy knees pressed into my back. Hands wrenched my arms behind me, handcuffing me so tight the metal bit into the bone. Stop resisting, someone shouted, though I couldn't move if I wanted to. Through the fog of pain and the flashing lights, I looked up at the plane. Rachel was standing at the top of the stairs. She wasn't rushing anymore. She was watching me being dragged away like a sack of garbage. She smoothed her dress. She adjusted her hair. She leaned down to the pilot who was standing in the open hatch. "We cannot leave yet," the pilot was saying. I could read his lips. "This is a crime scene now, ma'am. The police are taping off the runway. We are grounded until they clear the evidence." Rachel looked furious. She stomped her foot. But she turned and herded the kids inside the plane. They were not leaving. Not tonight. I had bought them time. I had traded my freedom for a delay. The police dragged me to the cruiser. I couldn't walk. My legs were still jelly from the voltage. They threw me into the back seat. As the car pulled away, I saw Dutch being handcuffed on the hood of his Chevelle. He looked at me and gave a small, sad nod. "We tried, Harry," his eyes said. "We tried." I passed out before we reached the station. I woke up to the steady beep of a heart monitor. The air smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. I tried to lift my hand to rub my eyes, but something stopped me. I looked down. My wrist was handcuffed to the metal rail of a hospital bed. I was in the prison ward. The room had bars on the windows and a uniformed deputy sitting by the door reading a magazine. My chest ached where the prongs had hit me. My head throbbed. The deputy saw I was awake. He stood up and walked over, looking down at me with zero sympathy. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Bennett," he said. "Where are they?" I croaked, my voice sounding like gravel. "Doesn't matter where they are," he said. "You have bigger problems. The district attorney just came by. They are adding to your charges." I closed my eyes. "What charges?" "Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, violation of a protective order, destruction of property, resisting arrest." He paused for effect. "And because you drove onto a federally regulated runway and attacked a plane, they are slapping you with acts of terrorism against an aviation facility. That is a federal crime, old-timer. You are looking at 20 years minimum. No bail this time." I stared at the ceiling tiles. 20 years. I would die in a cage. Rachel would get the kids. She would get the $18 million. She would win. Tears leaked out of the corners of my eyes and ran into my ears. I had failed. I had played my last card, and it wasn't enough. There was nothing left to do. No money for lawyers. No friends left to call. No truck to drive. I was done. Or so I thought. But as I lay there, chained like an animal, I remembered something. I remembered the loose floorboard in my bedroom, the one under the rug, the one the police hadn't found because they were too busy looking for a dungeon that didn't exist. Inside that hole in a cigar box that smelled of cedar was a yellow envelope. I had saved it for 13 years, hoping I would never have to use it. Hoping that Rachel would stay gone. Hoping that she would never force my hand. It was the nuclear option. The thing that would destroy her life completely. But it would also break my grandchildren's hearts. I didn't want them to know the truth. I wanted to protect them from the reality of who their mother really was. But I had no choice now. If I wanted to save them from a future with that woman, I had to destroy their past. I looked at the deputy. "I need to make a phone call," I said. "You get one," he said. "Who are you calling?" "I am not calling a lawyer," I said, my voice hardening. I am calling the only man left who can end this. I needed Dutch. I needed him to get out on bail and go to my house one last time. Because that envelope wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a receipt. And it was time to show the world what Rachel Bennett had really sold 13 years ago. The hours in the prison ward dragged on like a slow death. The air conditioning hummed a monotonous tune that grated on my nerves. I lay there handcuffed to the bed, staring at the rhythmic spike of my heart rate on the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only proof I was still alive. But Sterling Holt didn't want me alive. I knew men like him. Men who wear $3,000 suits and smile for the cameras are often more dangerous than the thugs I worked with on the oil rigs. Thugs will punch you in the face. Men like Holt will pay someone else to slip poison into your IV drip while you sleep. It was around 2:00 a.m. when the air in the room changed. The young deputy guarding my door had been replaced. The new guard was older with a thick neck and eyes that didn't blink enough. He didn't look at me. He looked at his watch. Then without a word, he stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. My instincts, sharpened by 40 years of surviving dangerous machinery and dangerous men, screamed at me. "Wake up, Harry." A shadow detached itself from the hallway darkness and slipped into my room. It wasn't a doctor. It was a man in scrubs, but they were too tight across his shoulders. He wore a surgical mask and blue latex gloves. He moved with a silent, predatory grace that didn't belong in a hospital. He approached my IV bag. He pulled a syringe from his pocket. The liquid inside was clear. "Who sent you?" I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel in a blender. The man froze. He looked down at me. His eyes were cold, dead things. "Just go to sleep, old man. It's better this way. Heart failure. Very common at your age." He reached for the injection port. I didn't think. I reacted. I couldn't move my left arm chained to the rail, but my right leg was free under the sheet. I waited until he leaned in close. Then I kicked. I put every ounce of old man rage and adrenaline into that kick. My heel connected squarely with his knee. There was a sickening crunch. The man howled a muffled sound of agony and collapsed sideways, dropping the syringe. It shattered on the floor. "Help!" I roared, rattling the chains. "Assassin, help!" The man scrambled up, limping badly, realizing he had lost the element of surprise. He looked at me one last time, a look promising he'd finish the job later, and bolted out the door, just as nurses came running down the hall. I survived. But as I lay there panting, watching the nurses clean up the shattered glass, I knew one thing for sure. The war had escalated. Holt knew I had something. He was terrified. And if he was trying to kill me here, God help Dutch. 5 miles away, under the cover of a moonless sky, Dutch was fighting his own war. He had parked his borrowed bicycle in the woods behind my property. The house, my home for 30 years, sat silent and dark, wrapped in yellow crime scene tape that fluttered like ghosts in the wind. To anyone else, it looked abandoned. But Dutch knew better. He told me later that the silence was too heavy. The crickets had stopped chirping. That meant predators were nearby. He slipped under the tape and pried open the back window of the laundry room with his pocket knife. He moved like a ghost, his boots making no sound on the linoleum. He knew the layout of my house as well as I did. He navigated through the kitchen, stepping over the debris left by the police raid. He reached the hallway. The floorboards creaked. Click. A beam of tactical light cut through the darkness, blinding him. Then another, and another. 3 beams converging on him from the living room. "We have a visitor," a voice said. It wasn't a police officer. It was the deep, confident voice of a mercenary. "Mr. Holt said the rat might come back for his cheese." Dutch didn't freeze. He dropped. A taser prong whizzed through the air where his chest had been a second before embedding itself in the drywall. Dutch rolled into the open doorway of the guest bedroom. "Get him," the voice commanded, "and make it look like an accident." He tripped and fell, repeatedly. Dutch scrambled into the darkness of the bedroom. He was 65 years old, fueled by whiskey and loyalty, up against 3 professionals half his age. He didn't have his gun. The police had taken it. He only had his hands and whatever he could find. He grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the bedside table. He waited. The first shadow filled the doorway. Dutch swung. The brass base connected with a skull with a dull thud. The man went down without a sound. 1 down. 2 to go. Dutch didn't wait for them to come to him. He charged. He barreled into the hallway, catching the second man by surprise. He drove his shoulder into the Tess's gut, tackling him into the opposite wall. The drywall cracked. The man grunted and brought a baton down hard on Dutch's shoulder. Dutch screamed but didn't let go. A head butted the man twice, breaking the mercenary's nose in a spray of blood. The man slumped. But the third man, the leader, was ready. He stepped out of the shadows and kicked Dutch in the ribs. I can only imagine the sound. Dutch flew backward, sliding across the floor of the hallway. He tried to get up, but a heavy boot pinned him to the ground. The leader loomed over him, aiming a flashlight into Dutch's eyes. "Where is it?" the man demanded, pressing his boot harder, crushing the breath out of Dutch's lungs. "We tore this house apart. We checked the walls. We checked the attic. Where did the old man hide the leverage?" Dutch, blood streaming from a cut over his eye, managed to grin. His teeth were stained red. "You checked the walls," he wheezed. "But you didn't check the floor." He grabbed the man's ankle and twisted. It was a dirty move. A bar fight move, something you learn when you stop fighting for points and start fighting for survival. The leader lost his balance and fell. Dutch scrambled away, crawling on hands and knees towards my bedroom. His ribs were on fire. His vision was blurring. He dragged himself into my room and kicked the door shut, jamming a chair under the handle just as the heavy bodies slammed against it from the other side. Thud. Thud. The doorframe began to splinter. Dutch had seconds, maybe less. He shoved the rug aside. He found the loose board. He used his bloody fingernails to pry it up. There it was, the cigar box. He grabbed it. It felt light, but inside was the weight of the world. The bedroom door exploded inward. The leader burst through his face, a mask of fury. He held a knife now, a long, serrated blade that glinted in the moonlight. "End of the line, old-timer," the man hissed. Dutch looked at the window. It was closed. It was glass. It was a second-story drop to the concrete patio below. He looked at the man with the knife. "Not yet," Dutch whispered. He hugged the cigar box to his chest, curled into a ball, and threw himself through the window. The glass shattered around him like a diamond explosion. He fell through the night air, shards slicing his skin, the wind rushing past his ears. He hit the bushes below. They broke his fall, but they also tore his flesh. He rolled onto the concrete, gasping, pain exploding in his leg. He looked down. A piece of glass was embedded deep in his calf, but he still had the box. He heard shouting from above. The beam of a flashlight swept the yard, searching for him. "He jumped!" someone yelled. "Get down there! Finish him!" Dutch forced himself up. He couldn't walk. He had to limp, dragging his injured leg, leaving a trail of blood on my patio stones. He scrambled over the back fence, tearing his shirt on the wood, and fell into the neighbor's yard, just as the mercenaries burst out the back door. He lay in the tall grass, holding his breath, clutching that cigar box like it was the Holy Grail. He heard them running past, their boots pounding on the pavement, searching the alley. They missed him. By inches. Dutch lay there for an hour, bleeding broken, listening to the sirens in the distance. He opened the box just a crack to make sure the envelope was still there. It was. He closed it. He didn't go to a hospital. He didn't go home. He knew they would be watching. He limped 5 miles through the woods, bleeding every step of the way, to get to the only place he knew he could deliver the payload. When I saw him the next morning in the visitation room, broken and battered, I didn't see a drunk. I didn't see a failure. I saw a soldier who had just completed the most important mission of his life. And as I held that blood-stained envelope, I knew that whatever happened in that courtroom, I couldn't lose. Because men like Holt had money, but I had Dutch. And that was a currency they couldn't devalue. The morning of the trial broke gray and humid, a typical Texas suffocating heat that made the air feel like a wet wool blanket. I didn't sleep. I spent the night with the yellow envelope tucked inside my prison jumpsuit right against my skin. It scratched me every time I moved, but that scratch was the only thing keeping me sane. It was the anchor. They transported me to the courthouse in a van with no windows. The shackles around my ankles chimed like death bells with every pothole we hit. When the back doors opened, the noise hit me first. It wasn't the sound of justice. It was the sound of a circus. Hundreds of people were crowded behind the barricades. Reporters with cameras on their shoulders were shouting my name, trying to get a reaction, a scowl, anything that would look good on the evening news. I saw signs held by strangers, people who didn't know me but hated me anyway. Protect the children, monster, lock him up. Sterling Holt had done his job well. He had turned the court of public opinion into a lynch mob. I kept my head down and shuffled into the building, my eyes fixed on the concrete. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing my fear. The courtroom was freezing. It was a massive room, paneled in dark, intimidating mahogany designed to make you feel small. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. I saw neighbors I had known for 20 years sitting there, avoiding my gaze. I saw the parents of Lucas's teammates. And then I saw her. Rachel was sitting at the plaintiff's table, but the woman in the cream-colored coat and designer sunglasses was gone. In her place was a grieving mother. She was wearing a simple gray cardigan that looked 2 sizes too big, making her look frail. She wore no makeup, exposing the natural dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She was clutching a tissue in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She looked like a saint who had been dragged through hell. Sterling Holt sat next to her, radiating confidence. He leaned over and whispered something in her ear, and she nodded bravely, looking down at her hands. My public defender, Arthur, was sweating again. He was arranging his papers into neat little stacks, trying to create order out of chaos. "Mr. Bennett," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The district attorney is going for the maximum, 20 years. But I think if you show remorse, if you plead guilty to the lesser charge of custodial interference, we might get it down to 10. You are 70. With good behavior." I looked at him. 10 years. I would die in prison in 5. "No deal." "Arthur," I said, my voice flat. "We are not pleading. All rise." Judge Patterson swept into the room. He was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, with a face that had forgotten how to smile. He sat behind the high bench and looked over his spectacles at me. His gaze was heavy with disdain. He had already read the papers. He had already seen the news. In his mind, I was already guilty. The trial began, and it was a bloodbath. Sterling Holt didn't just present a case, he put on a show. He painted a picture of a lonely, bitter old man who stole 3 children to fill the void in his pathetic life. He talked about Rachel's tireless search for her babies. He used words like dungeon and psychological torture. And then he called his star witness. I expected a cop. I expected a social worker. I didn't expect Mr. Gorski. Ted Gorski lived 2 houses down from me. I had helped him rebuild his fence after the hurricane last year. I had shared beers with him on my porch. Gorski walked to the stand and didn't look at me. Not once. "Mr. Gorski," Holt said, pacing in front of the jury box, Tell us what you heard coming from the Bennett house over the years. Gorski swallowed hard. He looked at Rachel, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. I heard screaming. Gorski said, his voice quiet. A lot of screaming. Late at night. I heard the kids begging to be let out. I heard Mr. Bennett. I heard him hitting them. A gasp went through the gallery. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Gorski was lying. He was lying through his teeth. The only screaming that ever came from my house was when the Cowboys fumbled the ball, or when the kids were wrestling in the living room. Liar, I whispered. Arthur grabbed my arm. Shh, Mr. Bennett. Do not make a scene. Holt smiled. And why didn't you call the police, Mr. Gorski? I was scared, Gorski said. Everyone in the neighborhood was scared of him. He is a violent man. He has a temper. He told me once that if anyone interfered with his family, he would bury them. It was a lie paid for with silver. I didn't know what Holt had given him, maybe money to pay off his gambling debts, maybe a threat, but Gorski had just sold his soul. The jury was eating it up. I could see it in their faces. They looked at me with disgust. They saw a monster. Arthur leaned over to me. This is bad, Harrison. This is really bad. We need to take the plea, right now before the jury comes back. I looked at Arthur. He was a good kid, but he was fighting a forest fire with a water pistol. He believed the system worked. He didn't understand that we weren't in a court of law anymore. We were in a theater. I reached into my jumpsuit. My fingers brushed the rough paper of the envelope. You are fired, Arthur, I said loud enough for the stenographer to hear. Arthur froze. Excuse me. I stood up. The chains on my ankles rattled, echoing in the silent room. I said, You are fired, son. Go home. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel. Mr. Bennett, sit down. You are represented by counsel. No, Your Honor, I said, raising my voice. I am stripping him of his duties. I am representing myself. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Sterling Holt turned around, a smirk playing on his lips. He loved this. An old man self-destructing in real time. It made his job easier. Judge Patterson leaned forward. Mr. Bennett, I strongly advise against that. You are facing serious federal charges. You do not know the rules of evidence. You do not know the procedure. You are digging your own grave. I looked at the judge. I looked at Rachel, who was watching me with wide, mock, terrified eyes. I may not know the procedure, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and hard. But I know the truth. And I am the only one in this room who does. The judge stared at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He sighed and rubbed his temples. Very well. It is your right. But I am warning you, Mr. Bennett, I will not tolerate a circus. One outburst, one step out of line, and I will hold you in contempt. I nodded. Understood, Your Honor. Arthur packed up his briefcase, his hands shaking. He looked at me with pity. Good luck, Mr. Bennett, he whispered. Then he walked away, leaving me alone at the defense table. It was just me now. Me and the shark. Mr. Bennett, the judge said. Call your first witness. I stood there. The silence stretched. The jury watched me, waiting for me to fail, waiting for the crazy old man to start ranting. I looked at Rachel. She was clutching a rosary now, moving her lips in silent prayer. It was a nice touch. I do not have a witness, Your Honor, I said. Sterling Holt chuckled. The judge looked annoyed. Then do you have a statement, Mr. Bennett? Or are we wasting the court's time? I reached into my shirt. I felt the sweat on my skin. I pulled out the yellow envelope. It was crumpled. It was stained with dirt and a smear of dried blood where Dutch had bled on it. I saw Rachel's eyes flick to the envelope. She stopped praying. Her body went rigid. She recognized it. Even from across the room, she recognized the color of her own sin. I don't have a witness, I repeated, walking slowly toward the bench. And I don't have a statement. I held the envelope up for the jury to see. I stood in the center of the courtroom, and the silence was so heavy it felt like it could crush the air out of my lungs. I held the envelope in my hand. It was just a thin piece of paper, but it carried the weight of 12 years of secrets and pain. I looked at Rachel sitting at the plaintiff's table. She was still trying to maintain that facade of the grieving, victimized mother, but I could see the cracks starting to form in her porcelain mask. She stared at the envelope, and for the first time since this trial began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She knew what was inside. She had to know. You do not forget the moment you sell your soul. I turned to Judge Patterson. I did not need a lawyer to do this for me. I did not need legal jargon or theatrical speeches. I just needed the truth. I opened the seal. The sound of the paper tearing echoed through the quiet room like a gunshot. My hands were steady. For years I had trembled with anxiety and doubt, wondering if I was doing enough. But in this moment I was as solid as a rock because I was not fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the memory of the children I raised. I pulled out the document. It was not a crisp, clean legal filing typed up by a high-priced attorney. It was a handwritten note on a piece of lined notebook paper yellowed with age. The edges were frayed. It looked like trash, but it had the official stamp of a notary public dated August 14, 2011. I cleared my throat and began to read. My voice rang out clear and cold, filling every corner of the room. I, Rachel Bennett, hereby sell full and permanent parental rights and authority regarding my children, Lucas, Emma, and Noah, to Harrison Bennett. This transfer of rights is final and absolute. In exchange for surrendering all claims to motherhood and agreeing to never contact them or Harrison Bennett again, I accept the sum of $15,000 in cash. This money is for the purchase of a 2011 Ford Mustang convertible. I swear on my life I will never return. I stopped reading, but I did not lower the paper. I let those words hang in the air. $15,000, the price of 3 human lives, the price of a convertible. The courtroom erupted into a collective gasp. It wasn't a murmur this time. It was the sound of dozens of people having the breath knocked out of them simultaneously. I saw the court reporter stop typing, her mouth hanging open. I saw the bailiff step forward, his face twisting in disgust. But I was not done. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out the photograph. It was clipped to the back of the letter. It was a glossy 4x6 print, the colors still vivid despite the years. I held it up first to the jury, then to the judge. The image was undeniable. It showed Rachel standing in the parking lot of a car dealership. The sun was bright. She was leaning against a cherry-red Ford Mustang with the top down. She was wearing sunglasses and a white sundress, and she was grinning. It was a wide, predatory smile of pure triumph. In one hand she held the car keys. In the other she fanned out a thick stack of $100 bills. But that was not the part of the photo that made your stomach turn. In the background, out of focus, but clearly visible on the burning hot concrete of the sidewalk, lay a baby carrier. It was Noah. He was 2 months old. His face was red and contorted in a scream of distress. He was abandoned on the pavement in the sweltering heat, while his mother posed with her new toy. I walked toward the bench and placed the letter and the photo directly in front of Judge Patterson. I watched him. He was a man who had seen everything in his career. He had seen murders and thieves and liars. But as he looked down at that handwritten receipt and that photograph, the color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. He picked up the paper. His hand. The hand that held the power of the law began to shake. It started as a subtle tremor and grew until the paper rattled in his grip. He adjusted his glasses as if he could not believe what his eyes were telling him. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he looked at the photo. I saw his jaw tighten. I saw the veins in his neck bulge. The professional detachment that judges are supposed to maintain evaporated. In its place was the raw fury of a human being looking at a monster. He looked from the photo to Rachel and back to the photo. It was a look of pure revulsion. I turned to look at Sterling Holt, the high-powered attorney who had spent weeks painting me as a villain and Rachel as a saint, was sitting frozen in his expensive chair. His face was gray. He looked at the document in the judge's hand, and then he looked at his client. He physically recoiled. He shifted his chair inches away from her, as if her presence was suddenly contagious, as if he could catch her moral rot just by being near her. He knew his case was dead. He knew his reputation would be stained forever just by associating with this. He closed his folder and put his pen down, signaling his total defeat. And Rachel. Rachel sat there, and for the first time she was truly naked before the world. The act was over. The tears had dried up. She stared at the photo in the judge's hand, and her mouth worked silently. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, searching for someone who would buy her lies, but there was no one. The jury looked at her with hatred. The gallery looked at her with horror. She was completely alone. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. It was broken only by the sound of Judge Patterson breathing heavily through his nose, trying to control his rage. He did not look at the lawyers. He did not look at the jury. He looked straight at Rachel. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous, trembling with suppressed anger. "Ms. Bennett," he said, and the way he said her name made it sound like a curse. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I thought I had seen the depths of human depravity. I thought I knew how low a person could sink for greed. But this..." He held up the handwritten note, shaking it slightly. "You sold your children." He continued, his voice rising slightly in volume. "You did not give them up for adoption because you couldn't care for them. You did not leave them with a relative because you were in trouble. You sold them. You traded the flesh and blood of 3 innocent human beings, 3 babies who depended on you for protection. And you traded them for a used car." The judge paused, taking a breath that shuddered in his chest. He held up the photo. "And you left your infant son on the pavement in the middle of summer to take a picture with money. You smiled while he screamed." Rachel stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her face was wild panic setting in as the walls closed around her. She looked at the judge, then at me, then at the exit signs. Her chest heaved. "That is not real," she screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill shriek that hurt the ears. "It is a lie. Harrison made it up. That is a forgery. It is fake." But her voice lacked conviction. It was the desperate wail of a trapped animal. The judge slammed his gavel down, not to call for order, but to silence her lie. The sound was like a thunderclap that shook the room. "The notary seal is authentic," the judge roared back, standing up from his chair and leaning over the bench. "The handwriting matches every document you have signed in this court for the last month. Do not insult my intelligence and do not insult the dignity of this court by lying to my face when the proof is in my hand." Rachel collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. But these were not the pretty, manipulative tears she had used before. These were ugly, guttural sounds of someone watching their world disintegrate. She shook her head back and forth, mumbling no over and over again, but no one was listening. Judge Patterson looked at me. His expression softened just a fraction, but the intensity was still there. He looked at me not as a defendant, but as a man who had survived a war. He placed the documents down gently, as if they were evidence of a crime scene, which, in a way, they were. The room remained suspended in that moment of revelation. The air was electric with the force of the truth. The receipt lay on the judge's bench, a dirty little scrap of paper that had finally brought down the entire empire of lies she had built. The Ford Mustang was long gone rust and scrap metal by now. The money was spent a decade ago, but the receipt remained. And it had just cost Rachel everything. The courtroom was still vibrating from the impact of the receipt and the photograph, but Rachel was not done fighting yet. She was cornered like a rat, and rats bite when they are trapped. She was sobbing loudly into her hands, screaming that the documents were forged, that I was a monster who was trying to frame her, but her performance was losing its audience. The jury looked at her with cold eyes. Judge Patterson looked at her with disgust. But even with the truth lying on the bench, I knew it wasn't over. She had Sterling Holt, and he was a magician who could turn water into wine, or in this case, turn a child seller into a victim. Holt stood up, buttoning his jacket, his face a mask of professional outrage. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," he boomed, trying to regain control of the room. "We demand a forensic analysis of that document. Mr. Bennett has had 13 years to forge this. It is hearsay. It is inadmissible." The judge looked like he was about to speak, like he was about to shut Holt down, but he never got the chance. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom slammed open with a sound like a thunderclap. It was loud enough that half the people in the gallery jumped out of their seats. I turned around in my chair, my chains rattling. Standing in the doorway framed by the light from the hallway was Lucas. My boy looked like he had run a marathon. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. He was sweating, his chest heaving up and down. He was missing a shoe. But his eyes were blazing with a fire I had only seen once before, when he stood between his little brother and a bully on the playground. He wasn't a scared kid anymore. He was a linebacker protecting his team. Lucas Tatchell screamed, her voice cracking. "What are you doing here? Get out!" Lucas ignored her. He didn't even look at her. He walked straight down the center aisle. The bailiff stepped forward to stop him, his hand reaching for his belt, but I stood up. "Let him through," I roared. "That is my grandson." Judge Patterson held up a hand to the bailiff. "Let the boy speak." Lucas walked past the bar. He walked past Sterling Holt, who was looking at him like he was a bomb about to go off. He walked right up to the defense table and stood next to me. He was taller than me now. He put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "I am sorry I am late, Grandpa," he panted. "I had to climb out the bathroom window at the hotel. The security guard was fast, but I was faster." He turned to the judge. He didn't look terrified. He looked determined. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deepening into the man's voice he was becoming. "Everything my grandfather said is true. She is lying. She has been lying since the day she came back." Rachel stood up, her face twisted into a mask of panic. "Lucas, baby, don't say that. You are confused. You are traumatized. Remember what we talked about? Remember the trip to Europe?" "Shut up," Lucas shouted. The force of his voice silenced the room. He turned back to the judge. "She doesn't want us, Your Honor. She never wanted us. She wants the money." Holt stepped forward. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is a minor. He is clearly under duress. He has been brainwashed by the defendant for years." Lucas reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, cheap, black flip phone. It was the burner phone I had slid under his pillow the night before the raid. The one Rachel thought she had confiscated, but she had only found the decoy. "I am not brainwashed," Lucas said, holding the phone up like a weapon. "And I have proof." He flipped the phone open. He pressed a button. He held it up to the microphone on the witness stand. The audio was tinny and scratched with static, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Rachel. And she wasn't crying. She wasn't using her soft, motherly voice. She sounded sharp, cruel, and annoyed. I played it for everyone to hear. "So when do I get the money?" the voice on the phone demanded. "It was recorded just last night." A man's voice answered, muffled and low. "As soon as the guardianship is signed, baby. Tuesday." Then Rachel's voice again, louder this time. "Good. Because I cannot stand another day with these brats. The big one, Lucas, he looks at me like he wants to kill me. And the little one, Noah, he is always whining. It is pathetic." "Just hold on a little longer," the man said. $18 million, Rachel. Keep your eyes on the prize. I know, Rachel snapped. I just want this over. Listen, as soon as the check clears, I am booking 3 tickets to that boarding school in Switzerland. The one with the strict discipline program. It is the cheapest one I could find, but it is far away. But what about the old man? The man asked. What about your dad? Rachel laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that chilled the air in the courtroom. Don't worry about him. Holt says he is going down for 20 years. He is old. He has a bad heart. He will die in there. He will rot in a cell, and I will be drinking champagne in Paris while his precious grandkids are locked away in the Alps. He is a clueless old fool who should have died years ago. Lucas hit the stop button. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was heavier than the silence after the receipt. This was the voice of the devil herself, unmasked and ugly. I looked at the jury. They looked horrified. One juror, a grandmother in the front row, had her hand over her mouth. I looked at Judge Patterson. His face was stone cold. He wasn't shocked anymore. He was furious. And then I looked at Rachel. She wasn't crying anymore. The mask had completely shattered. Her eyes were wide, wild, and filled with a primal rage. She realized in that second that her life was over. The money was gone. The mansion was gone. The freedom was gone. She let out a scream that didn't sound human. It was a shriek of pure hate. Give me that, she screamed. She lunged. She didn't lunge at me. She lunged at Lucas. She threw herself across the table, her hands clawing for the phone, her nails aiming for her own son's face. You ungrateful little bastard, she shrieked. Give it to me. I own you. Lucas didn't flinch. He stepped back, holding the phone out of reach. But I moved. Chains or no chains, I stepped in front of my boy. But I didn't need to fight her. Bailiffs. Judge Patterson shouted, his voice booming like a cannon. Restrain her! 3 officers were on her in a second. They tackled her to the floor. She fought them, kicking and biting, screaming obscenities that made the stenographer cringe. She was cursing Lucas. She was cursing me. She was cursing the money she never got. Get off me, she screamed as they pinned her arms behind her back and clicked the handcuffs on. I am the mother. They are mine. Sterling Holt saw the ship going down and decided to jump. He quietly closed his briefcase. He gathered his papers, trying to look invisible. He started to sidestep toward the exit, his eyes on the door. He almost made it to the gate. Mr. Holt, Judge Patterson said. His voice was quiet, but it stopped the lawyer in his tracks. Holt froze. He turned around, forcing a weak smile. Your Honor, I believe my services are no longer required here. I should probably go and prepare a withdrawal motion. Sit down, Mr. Holt, the judge commanded, pointing a finger at the defense table. You are not going anywhere. But, Your Honor, Holt stammered. The judge leaned over the bench. You presented a witness who you knew was perjuring himself. You facilitated a fraud upon this court. You were complicit in a conspiracy to strip a man of his freedom and his family for financial gain. The judge looked at the bailiffs who were hauling Rachel to her feet. Deputy, take Ms. Bennett into custody immediately. The charges are perjury, fraud, child abandonment, and assault, and add conspiracy to commit custodial interference. Rachel was screaming as they dragged her toward the side door, the door that led to the cells. She looked back at me one last time. I hate you, she screamed. I wish you were dead. I looked at her, and for the first time in 13 years, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. I know, I said quietly. And that is why you lost. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off her screams. The judge turned his burning gaze to Sterling Holt, who was now shaking in his $3,000 suit. And take Mr. Holt into custody as well, the judge ordered. I am holding you in contempt of court pending a full investigation by the district attorney into your conduct. I will be recommending disbarment and criminal charges for conspiracy and fraud. 2 officers grabbed Holt by the arms. He didn't fight. He just slumped, looking like a balloon that had lost all its air. They marched him out the same door, his expensive Italian shoes dragging on the floor. The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. The gallery was buzzing. But in the middle of the storm, there was calm. Lucas turned to me. He was still breathing hard. He looked at my chains. "Did we win, Grandpa?" he asked, his voice trembling, just a little now that the adrenaline was fading. I looked at the judge who was signaling the bailiff to unlock my shackles. I looked at the empty space where the monsters used to be. "Yeah, son," I said, pulling him into a hug that I never wanted to end. "Yeah, we won." Judge Patterson banged his gavel one last time. "Case dismissed with prejudice," he declared. "Mr. Bennett, you are free to go. And Mr. Bennett, regarding the custody of the minors," he smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his granite face, "I think they are exactly where they belong." I walked out of that courtroom, not as a prisoner, but as a grandfather. Lucas was by my side, and we had a lot of work to do. We had to go get Emma and Noah. We had to go home, and we had to start living the life that Rachel had tried to sell for a used car. But we weren't going back to the old house. We were going forward. And I had a feeling the view from the Grand Canyon was going to be spectacular. The air outside the courthouse tasted different than it had that morning. It tasted like rain and asphalt, but to me, it tasted like freedom. I stood on the steps with Lucas by my side and watched as the police cruiser took Rachel away. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was staring out the window with a hollow look, her face pressed against the glass, watching the life she had tried to steal disappear in the rearview mirror. Judge Patterson didn't go easy on her. The sentence was handed down 3 weeks later, but the writing was on the wall the moment that receipt hit the bench. 15 years. 15 years for fraud, for perjury, for conspiracy, and for the child abandonment that started it all. Sterling Holt didn't fare much better. He was disbarred and facing his own indictment for witness tampering and suborning perjury. The sharks had eaten the sharks, but I didn't have time to worry about them. I had a job to do. I had to go get my babies. We drove straight to the hotel where Rachel had been keeping them. The security guards who had bullied Lucas tried to stop us at the elevator, but this time I didn't have a tire iron. I had a court order signed by a federal judge. The moment I showed it to them, they scattered like cockroaches. When I opened the door to that suite, Emma and Noah were sitting on the couch, huddled together, looking terrified. They thought their mother was coming back to drag them to Switzerland. When they saw me, when they saw Lucas safe and smiling, the sound they made broke my heart and put it back together all at once. It was a collective sob of relief. Noah hit me at full speed, burying his face in my stomach. Emma held onto my arm like she was drowning. I held them there in that fancy hotel room, and I promised them that nobody would ever take them away again. The next few months were a blur of paperwork and restructuring. The first thing I did was address the elephant in the room. The money. $18.5 million. It was a number that didn't feel real. It was ghost money, money from a father they never knew, and a mother who sold them out. But it was their money. I walked into the law firm that was managing the trust, the one that had been so eager to help Rachel raid the accounts. I was wearing my best flannel shirt and my work boots. The junior partners looked down their noses at me until I laid the guardianship papers on the conference table. I fired them all. Every single manager, every lawyer who had enabled Rachel, every accountant who had looked the other way. I cleaned house. I moved the trust to a conservative firm with a reputation for ironclad ethics. I set it up so that not even I could touch the principal boss. That money was for their college, for their first homes, for their futures. I took the management fee the court allotted me, but I didn't use it for sports cars or designer clothes. I used it to fix what was broken. 6 months later, I stood in the driveway of my old house. The for sale sign was planted in the yard, swinging gently in the Texas breeze. It was hard to say goodbye. That house had seen me raise my daughter and then raise her children. It had seen laughter and tears. But it had also seen the police raid. It had seen the door kicked in. It had seen the ghosts of my failures. It was time to let it go. We didn't need the walls to be a family. We just needed each other. I sold it to a young couple just starting out. I hoped they would have better luck with it than I did. I took the proceeds from the house and a portion of the management fee, and I bought something I had been dreaming about since I was 20 years old, working double shifts on the rig. I bought a beast. It was a 40-foot Class A motorhome, a rolling palace with king-sized beds, a full kitchen, and enough room for 4 people to live like royalty on the road. We left Texas on a Tuesday morning. We didn't look back. We drove west. We watched the flat plains turn into rolling hills and then into the jagged red rocks of the desert. We sang along to the radio. We stopped at roadside diners. We laughed until our sides hurt. For the first time in 13 years, there was no shadow hanging over us. There was no fear that a car pulling into the driveway was Rachel coming to take what wasn't hers. There was just the open road and the horizon. And now here we are. I am sitting in a folding chair on the edge of the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The sun is setting, painting the sky in colors that don't have names, burning orange and deep purple and gold. The air is crisp and clean. In front of me, a campfire is crackling. Lucas is teaching Noah how to roast a marshmallow without setting it on fire, though Noah seems determined to burn his to a crisp anyway. Emma is reading a book wrapped in a blanket, her feet propped up on a log, looking peaceful, in a way I haven't seen since she was a toddler. I look at them and I don't see $18 million. I don't see trust funds or legal battles. I see my kids. Rachel thought she could buy happiness. She thought that a mansion and a private jet would fill the hole inside her. She thought that selling her own flesh and blood for $15,000 was a good deal because it got her a convertible Mustang. She thought value was something you could count in a bank account. She was wrong. I look at Noah laughing as his marshmallow catches fire and he blows it out. I look at Lucas patting him on the back. I look at Emma smiling at her brothers. Rachel sold these moments for $15,000. She traded a lifetime of this for a car that is probably rusting in a junkyard somewhere by now. But me, I would not trade this for anything. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and wood smoke. I am 70 years old. My knees still ache when it rains and my back is stiff from the drive. But I have never felt richer in my life. People say blood is thicker than water. They use it to excuse all kinds of sins. They use it to say you have to forgive family no matter what they do to you. But I learned the hard way that blood is just biology. Love is a choice. Loyalty is an action. Rachel chose money. I chose them. And as I watched the sun dip below the canyon wall, casting long shadows across the red earth, I know I made the right deal. Rachel sold my grandkids for the price of a used car. But to me, even that $18 million sitting in the bank isn't worth as much as a single one of their hugs. Because family isn't whose DNA you share. Family isn't who gave birth to you. Family is who stays. Family is who stands in the driveway and sells their truck to pay your debts. Family is who drives through a security gate to stop a plane. Family is who sits by your side in a courtroom when the whole world is against you. Family is the people who are there when the storm hits and who are still there when the sun comes out. And looking at my 3 kids by the fire, I know one thing for sure. We are home. No matter where we park this RV, we are home. And that is a wealth that Rachel will never ever understand. Rachel believed that $18 million was a ticket to happiness, but it was actually a life sentence of loneliness. She taught me a priceless lesson. Biology is just genetics. But family is a choice. Family isn't who gave birth to you. It is the person who stays when the storm hits, the one who sells their truck or stands between you and the world to keep you safe. I would rather live in a cramped RV filled with my grandchildren's laughter than in a silent mansion. Never trade real love for money, because loyalty is the one thing you cannot buy. If this story of fighting for justice and protecting the ones you love touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to support this old man. Where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. I appreciate you, and I look forward to reading every single one.